Hello and welcome to another episode of Speculative Speculations. I'm Varsha.
I'm Jarrod.
And I'm Dan.
Steve.
And I'm Chris.
And this is a series where we talk about speculative stories in all their forms. Today, we're going to be wrapping up Children of Time, which is slightly different. Children of Ruin, which is slightly different from what I had announced at the end of the episode. Last week, we had to take a break for recording, so we are discussing the last half of the book all at once. The short story for today is Surface Tension by James Blish. The short story for next week is Beyond Lies the Wub by Philip K. Dick. That title is incredibly amusing. And today, we are going on an adventure. So, what did everybody think of the last half of Children of Ruin? Oh, and before I forget, we are not going to be immediately continuing on with Children of Memory, although we may pick that up after a couple of books that we read later on. What we will be starting is Red Shirts by John Scalzi. Did I get the name right? John Scalzi.
Yep.
We're going to be reading through chapter 9, which brings us to about the 100-page mark. With that, let's talk Children of Ruin, the last half of it. Somewhat
Chris, why don't you
silence.
start us off?
Okay, I'll
Everybody
start us
loved
off.
it.
Because you're positive.
Yeah, I am quite positive on it. I was struggling like a lot of us, I think, at around the halfway stage, and I won't say that from the halfway point on it got immeasurably better in theme or otherwise, but I think it got interesting enough that I could kind of see what it was roughly trying to do. It I think specifically it answered a few of the bigger questions that I had, which was, right, if the spiders have been accelerated by a virus and the octopus or the cephalopods weren't really in the same way, how come over the same very extended period of time they're kind of so different? And it did at least address some of those kind of questions. Those were the things that were bugging me, I think, a lot at about a halfway point. At the end of it annoys me greatly, but it more so than I think it's too neat and tidy for it to happen, this utopian society to exist again. And I think that's the bit that I really have problems with. So there's my kind of journey through it, insofar as I liked kind of the middle part of it. I kind of got towards the end and was rattling through it quite a lot, because I think Tchaikovsky does get propulsion at the end of his books to kind of drive you on through the last 100 pages or so. But the ending, I don't know if I love.
Yeah, I don't know. I struggled through most of this book, to be honest. I think there were some interesting parts, and the interesting parts were the new parts. So the parts in Nod and with the new sort of parasite, etc., etc. But everything that was like treading ground we already went over, is really hard for me. Especially because sci-fi is all about the idea, and here, if the idea is the same, this is not like a character-driven. It's like there are characters, yeah, but it's like that's not what you're reading for it. Like they're not like super compelling, and you're not like seeing their evolution or whatever. So if it's all about the ideas, we already went through most of this. So I don't know, I just found myself certain chapters just like my eyes like glazing through a page, kind of like, okay, well, I know sort of what's happening. This is nothing new. It could have been the first. It could have been like a chapter or two at the end of the first book or something, and that would have been, it would have been fine for me. I don't know. I don't. It feels like it didn't. There didn't need to be a second book, and it just feels like stretching the material too much for me.
That's an interesting point you brought up about the characterization and moving things along. Because I found that this book, because the first book was so plot driven, that it just kept you going with the plot, and it just kept you moving forward and on to the next thing and on to the next thing. And this book seemed to stop and philosophize for a chapter or two before it went on to the next plot point that you were aching to get to because that's what you were kind of used to in the first book. And so all of a sudden you have octopus philosophy for 10 pages and you're like, okay, well that's neat. But it didn't seem to gel very well for me. And that was, I think, what kind of bogged the book down. I still enjoyed it. I still liked when he got back to the plot focused stuff. I was like, okay, this is cool. Something's happening. They're having the encounter with the virus dude, the being thing that came from the planet, and and they're trying to figure out a way around it. They're trying to they're working things out, and that was very exciting stuff. But then he would just throw in a chapter of the of somebody philosophizing about the whole thing, and it just didn't quite gel together as well as the first book did.
Varsha?
I might be a bit of an outlier because I loved this book as much
Nice.
as Children of Time.
Hmm.
So I think for me, all the things that felt familiar were comforting, like basically sort of establishing ground we've been through and like adding. So this could have very well been its own thing without being a sequel to the previous book, right? So the elements that were different, that were the same, it sort of basically gave the sense of being from the same universe, being building on the same characters a little bit. And also, I think some of the recurrence of the themes from the previous books. So that bit was somewhat comforting to me. I enjoyed that. And there were parts that bogged me down. Like, I think the part that we did not do a separate discussion for, that we skipped over and got to the end of the book for, that bit, I think that section, I was super slow with that, and it did bog me down quite a bit. I will admit that there were parts, but there were also parts in the first book that I felt like that about. They weren't quite as long as in the second book, but there were bits that were slow, interesting, but slow. I did end up switching to the audiobook for the last quarter, and I loved the narrator. So it's possible that the last bit also would have had things that would bog me down, but she is a joy to listen to. I loved her narration, and she made everything sound fun, even the slower bits. So
Who's the narrator?
Mel Hudson, I think. I'll have to look her up. It's she. This is the first book I've listened to by her, so I don't like have her name off the top of my head. But yeah, she's really good, and she's done all 3 books. And then I think the thing that I loved best about the first books was how masterful the first book. I mean, how masterful Tchaikovsky is in drawing parallels or adding meaning to a situation that we've just encountered with a corresponding situation with a different group. And I think he did that brilliantly here. He brought Khan to the forefront, who I didn't think I was interested in anymore, but she kind of became central to the story. And I loved how she became that. And again, in the part that bogged me down, I was like, why the hell are we having this existential crisis of Khan and like with her wanting to feel emotions and stuff? And then he brought it all together. It was so brilliant when Lante, Meshner, and Khan, they're all different but similar enough that scene where they were all 3 together, I thought that just like wrapped up the whole thing brilliantly. And the parallels there, right? First with all the parallels that he built throughout. First with the what are we calling the creatures? The we that are the them, that they are the they.
Yeah.
Anyway, they
The parasite.
the
I guess.
parasites, they so you know how they take over the corpus callosum and they sort of interpret information going across both sides of the brain. Khan became that for Meshner for a while. Then she became what Lante was for Meshner. And it's just like all of those similarities yet subtle differences, I thought was brilliantly done. I think, yeah, like I said, my favorite bit of the first book was the parallels and how they added meaning, and I think he did that excellently all over again. And making me care about Kern again. That was interesting too. So yeah, I loved this book. I also loved all the themes that were explored. And yes, I agree with you, Chris, that it was a bit wrapping up everything too neatly, and I felt like maybe the first book did that too. But I feel like we have enough resolution in sci-fi and fantasy with like a big war with the good guys winning, that I don't mind that they're trying to find a solution that will bring the conflict to an end by understanding each other. Like, yeah, it does feel like a bit of a, what's the term that's used to to put down things like the Hallmark movie, but I don't care. I like it. I like that this is
Fairy tale ending.
fairy tale ending. I don't mind. Like, I think this sort of serves the purpose of a parable, right? Like teaching you how to behave in a sense. So like as a teachable thing, I think it's great. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Seems to me that like you resonate a lot more with the characters, and that's probably why you like a lot of these parts. It seems, because I really didn't like the characters. That was a problem for me. I couldn't get into any of the characters.
So that's an interesting point, because I don't think I liked any of the characters. None of them stood out to me. When Meshna got his backstory, I did not care.
Okay.
And and with Khan also, like I did not, like I said, I didn't care for the existential crisis she had, but how that played into the final resolution, I thought was brilliant. So no, I don't think. Okay, I will say one thing. All the individuals in this book I liked more than the individuals in the previous book, as like they were more likable. But I did not. That doesn't mean I liked them, if that makes sense. I don't think I was attached to any of the characters in the previous book either. Yeah, I think these two books really worked for me on the level of ideas and perhaps storytelling. Like perhaps that's what's interesting to me, like with the parallels and stuff, the storytelling parts of it. So yeah, characters, if you ask me to pick a favorite, I don't have one. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, like I mean, again, like with Meshner and his backstory, I was like, why do we have this 2-page not? I did not like it, or at least I didn't care. So yeah, I don't think it was because of the characters, to answer your question. What did you think, Steve? I don't think we got to hear your opinion.
So, okay, well, there's a couple of things that I try to remember that this is the second book in a trilogy. So the story is not told yet. So I try to remember that. Also, I try to remember that we read these books back to back, and there was, if you would read them when they were published, you would have a couple of years or however long it was between to kind of, like forget what just happened. So I think the second book was was very close to the first one. It seemed like the same characters with the different names, and I think the similarities between the humans and then the spiders having the same names, it just seemed way too familiar. It just seemed like we're just retreading ground again. And I'm more of a character person, so this really wasn't. I think Danny mentioned that there's not really, the characters weren't. I couldn't get attached to any of them. I just didn't care about any of them, and I realized that I'm a jaded asshole, because at the end I was disappointed, because it's like, stop it, you're hurting people, let's be friends. And it's like, okay, like let's be friends. And I get it's more of like a self-preservation thing. It's more of like, let's work together and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and I guess that's cool and everything. And I kind of think that I kind of took it as Tchaikovsky making a statement about humanity, that humanity wouldn't be able to do that without help from the spiders. And I guess it's like one of those things that's easy to dunk on, is like religion, humanity. That's like low hanging fruit. Like you can dunk on those things like constantly. You could just pick. It's easy to dunk on those things, on those ideas. So it was fine. I mean, it was all right. It just seemed like it was a little too close in terms of like the ideas and the things that it was exploring to the first book, that it kind of lost me there for a while. And at the ending, I was hoping for something more dramatic, I guess, or something more But again, he might be setting us up for something wild in the third book. And not that I want everyone to die, but I was hoping for something a little bit, something more, I don't know, more of a, something happen. And I thought the first book was a little bittersweet with the humans basically becoming slaves to the spiders. I kind of felt like that was sad in a way. So I enjoyed that ending more than this one, because the first one I thought was a little depressing. But yeah, I mean, it was fine, kind of middle of the road. I really like the first one. The second one is just too close to the first one for me.
I think it's really interesting because between the end of the first book and then through you say the first half of this book, I think there were a couple of like what were interesting pressure points that he set up. So one, the subjugation of humanity. Didn't really explore that at all in any way. I just feel like it was a missed opportunity. And again, as you say, third book could be coming in there. They had the parasite, and parasites by their very nature don't care about symbiosis. Like they want to take over. And then you had, again, I thought this really clever idea of Kern sort of having lost themselves by being lonely as an AI program, and that she just wanted to make a connection with somebody through Meshner, right? And none of it kind of came to any event. Like all three of them just kind of resolved, kind of neatly tuned out. And I was bleeding heart liberal as anybody I've ever met in my entire life. But when you set up tension like that, or you set up the possibility for tension, to have them all resolved in one way, even if it's only temporarily, is not as satisfying as it could have been. Like if you'd have done it once or resolved one of those things kind of nice and neatly, but left a couple of threads kind of hanging, I would have been right. Okay, there's propulsion on the next book there. You know, there's something to carry on and know what's coming. Whereas in this case, we've went from humanity and spiders sort of coming to a point where we're going to be at loggerheads and we're going to go to war. Problem coming to, no, we're okay. We injected them with some sort of like understanding serum. And then same thing here. This parasite sort of not realizing that it was taking over the person, you know, which again in its own right, I sort of agree with you. Of course, it's an interesting idea that kind of realization came on them, but for them just to go, it's all right, everybody, and especially in this book because it all seemed, that final moment seemed to happen behind closed doors. You know, it was very much, you know, with they cut the chapters up and they edited up. We didn't see the final conversation, and it was just the communication that came through. It says, everything's all right, guys, trust us. And the octopuses had never given octopi, cephalopods, whatever, had never given an indication that they were ever listening to the humans or that they would really take it on board. And it sort of played with the idea that there was a war between the military factions and the scientific factions. But again, that resolved very easily, you know, or a bit too easily, maybe.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I wonder, I would be interested in knowing, like actually knowing the author, why he wrote the second book. Like that to me would be quite interesting because like I don't, in my, like for me, it feels unnecessary. And I really hate the necessary thing, unfortunately. That's something I really hate. I hate filler episodes. I hate stuff that doesn't need to be there. I like lean cuts. Something, whatever. Visions, movies, whatever it is. So I'd really like to know if it's like, is this building to something? Or is this like, oh, the first one was a success, so I'll make more ones, right? Like, because right now, the second book kind of made the first one worse for me, unfortunately. I would just prefer to read the first one. But if, I don't know, if the third one is building, if it's all building up to something, maybe it means something, right? But maybe the second one could have been like a parallel book, something you don't need to read for the third one. And you can if you want, just like, you know, books in the same universe as a trilogy, but if it's not part of a trilogy, you can read it if you want, but you don't have to. Like right now, it feels kind of something like that.
For
But
everything
I
I'd
don't know.
heard about the series, I thought these were pretty much three standalones in the same universe. I didn't think they were building on top of each other. But I could be wrong. I only heard things here and there to get that impression. And I don't think the third book, I might, based on the blurb, I think it's just going to be something new that's being explored. But with that said, I think the second book, while treading similar ground as the first one, I do think that the theme that it brought to the forefront, especially with Kern, was the nature of artificial intelligence, right? Both artificial intelligence and I suppose a little bit to uploaded consciousness, what that might look like. And Kern and the other creature are so similar in that regard. Like Lante and Kern are basically the same. She's got her consciousness distributed through the ants, and Lante has her consciousness distributed through the parasites. They and in a very similar way, because Lante, well, I guess Kern is aware that she's no longer her own person and she's an uploaded consciousness, and Lante is not. But that wasn't something that was explored much in the first book, and I think, and based on like the final resolution and how that became the most important thing to help solve all the problems, I think that may have been what he was exploring in this one, the nature of an uploaded consciousness, if that makes sense. That definitely added to this book for me, like over the
Yeah.
first book. I think that's new for sure. And yeah, maybe everything else is similar enough. Like, I think the first book spent a lot of time on how different the spider consciousness is from humans and how they do things differently, which I enjoyed. We didn't spend too much time on how the octopus society built up, but there was this one view into how they the ideas were the same, but the cephalopods involved in the ideas kept transitioning because I really loved that bit where they I forget what the line was, but essentially they cannot be bigoted or have any particular, like, be married to any particular ideas. They're super fluid because that's how they think. And I thought that was interesting. I didn't necessarily see that as that bit could be a dig on like humans aren't like this, but I don't think it was. A lot of the things that they did about spiders did feel like that, but this one just felt like they're different and they behave differently, and that's cool. Like that. So anyway, that worked. So those were the two new things that I could think of. Not sure if they warrant a whole book versus just a
Yeah.
short story, but
Yeah, it was really interesting with the when Meshner
Yep.
Yeah.
were those injections he was taking to try to get that tap into the spider consciousness or something like that, or
It was an implant, wasn't it? Given by
implant,
Fabian?
right?
Yeah.
Implant.
Yeah.
All right. So when he started doing that, I could definitely tell right away that there was going to be some tie-in with the way that he has this kind of new awareness of things, and he's adjusting to this new conscious state of being, and tie into how the parasite takes over a creature and has to adjust to a new conscious state of being, and how Kern already was, and how she was kind of seeking others like herself, and how just the whole cephalopod society worked in general. So I thought all that stuff was pretty cool. It was pretty neat how he was trying to relate all those things, and he made it kind of work out so that all those things kind of came together at once, and there was just kind of big realization amongst all the different facets of consciousness from all the different dual conscious creatures or programs that came to this big understanding. And so that was, a lot of plot twisting on Tchaikovsky's part to get that to work. But it doesn't, I don't think it takes away from all the neat, cool ideas that were presented, even if it did seem to wrap up a little too easily. I still like his use of mythology, where he mentioned that Sokovia was a benign creator in the cephalopod mythology, and that Baltial was the fallen angel of that mythology, and that was pretty neat. And there was also there was an octopus called Noah, whose people suffer the cataclysm. That was far more biblical in proportion and stuff like that. But they did have a couple of questions. There was one, the last line before the end where it says future, we 2 or 3 shall gather. The last line says, no return trip had been planned. However, the actual signal will be forced to travel the old-fashioned way under the stern eye of a relativity that does not even realize it has been tricked. And I kind of was a little lost about what exactly that meant, and I didn't know if one of you more science people can explain that to me.
Chris wanted to go.
Sorry, could you repeat? I missed the part.
The actual signal will be forced to travel the old-fashioned way under the stern eye of a relativity that does not even realize it has been tricked. And I'm assuming it has to do with Einstein's theory of relativity, but I'm kind of wondering how it's been tricked and how that would work in this case.
So I can only use supposition in this case because he doesn't explain it out. But for me, he's almost certainly talking about the idea of folding space, in which case you can travel from one point to another. So if you fold space in itself, you can create 2 overlapping points, or otherwise, which doesn't travel along the route straight line path that relativity does. So you can circumvent the time loss and all of that kind of stuff. It's one of those scientific theoretical ideas that science fiction likes to play with a lot. I think especially for traveling large distances and short spaces of time and not having to worry about, like, that's pretty much every sci-fi novel falls into the problem of how are we going to deal with traveling long space and short distance of time. Some people get put to sleep, get cryogenically frozen. Some people do folding space time. It seems to me that that's what he's talking about in that way, but that the messages and transmissions had to be sent classic way because radio waves and etc. wouldn't work in full space idea. That's what I took from it as being how it was happening, although it is not laid out like that. That's me just kind of.
And it's the cephalopods who developed that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
They did build that, so I think that was my interpretation too. That's what.
Okay.
They are referring to the wormhole that they built.
Because I think that's going to be kind of important if the 3rd book does go forward at all. I think that's going to be an important thing. That seems to be just kind of a quick mention here. And I was like, oh, okay.
Well, the interesting thing that it brings up is this idea that they'll be able to travel and get there. And a bit like the original escapades, no way they're talking about the 30-year gap, the time lapse between the message getting sent out and coming back. So you'll be able to travel and get to somewhere, but actually calling for help will be almost nearly impossible in that case because you will have traveled much further than the time taken for a message to be sent or received to be done. So you're sort of on your own in that case. So it's the Star Trek Voyager problem of phone space wormhole, other side of the galaxy. Transmission. I mean, you can send a message, sure, but it's not going to get there in any time to be of any use for you. So
send it through a wormhole.
It does create that possibility. Yeah, send it through a wormhole. Yeah, with the space burst.
Yeah, I haven't microfolded space like
I
Becky
mean,
Chambers
if you can
has
send
done yet.
something through a wormhole, you can just send a transmitter and then like a USB, and then it retransmits the sign on the other side, I guess.
Yes, we've worked out in full space, but we're still transmitting using USB sticks.
Cassette tape. Cassette tape.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, I meant like a physical data storage.
Like a probe, yeah.
Sorry,
but making a comeback.
Yeah.
I mean, right?
True. Yeah,
these days, sometimes it's better to send the data via USB or hard drive if it's too much data and the connection rate is too slow. We do it here too, so it's kind of similar.
People are going to get nostalgic for setting things along copper wires as well. taking
Send a
25
tin
minutes to
can.
download an MP3. Hello,
Tin
Riz.
can with a piece of string.
Yes.
There were a couple of
Sorry, go
other
ahead.
things that I found were interesting, sort of bouncing off some of your points, Jarrod and Varsha. I sort of thought that actually Tchaikovsky was alluding that the cephalopods were humanity, because he has that whole conversation around that the cephalopods, other than this bit that they're sort of ignoring because Tchaikovsky told them, you don't go near this place, this is dangerous or otherwise, they had no outside threats, so they had nothing to kind of influence their progress. You know, there was no drive to move and do anything else. They were sort of using the human technology that they already had, and so the only resort then was to pick infighting. So they sort of fought with themselves to no great avail, which is sort of where humanity is. You know, there was no great big plan or outside threat, and if we had an existential threat or a big threat, we would have a focus for what we're going to do. But as it is, we just pick infights about stuff that, in the big scheme of things, if anything that happened, didn't. And I think that's what I read from his portrayal of the cephalopods in that way, because I think he always does try and make some sort of allusion to modern society in some way.
I mean, we still do have, we always have a technological advancement, right? There's always an incentive for technological advance in our society, right? Be it money or research or whatever,
But
right?
it's capitalism has done it.
Well,
for
or
us
just
now.
even
Yeah,
making
that's
your
true.
own
Yeah.
job easier, right? Like doing less work.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's a lot of infighting that comes with that too. So
Yeah.
and I think that was Chris's point about the cephalopods.
Yeah.
They seem to they seem to use their own infighting as progression.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to
for their
imagine like a
species.
human society. I don't know. I guess our society is always sort of towards progressing towards something. So it's like always trying to, evolve or do something new. I guess in the past, for I don't know, 4,000 years ago, it was much slower, but technically it was still there. I mean, I guess at any point in which
Yeah.
humans were not busy 100% of the time just trying to survive, right? Like people are always trying to do something, I feel.
Mhm. Some people.
Yeah,
Well,
I
humanity.
think you're right, Dan. But but for modern society, it's about making profit and making money. Like you can think about the advancements we can make in medicines, etc. But the only time it gets produced is when people find a vehicle to make money out of it.
Yeah.
They're not doing it for the betterment of society in a lot of ways. But everything's a modern drive. Even progressions in technology are sort of metered out. Right, we'll do it this stage now because we'd be able to sell that product.
Yeah.
Rather than kind of making a leap, which they probably will wait 3 years and make a leap. No, they're doing it in 3 smaller steps because the money can be made that way. So, I mean, rightly or wrongly with what he's saying, I think that was what I read from his description, or that part of the description of the cephalopods, was that they are sort of stagnating in a way that they needn't to, because they were using the advantage of having been given the human technology when Tchaikovsky went. You know, that was the difference between them and the spiders. Is that they had to build theirs, whereas the cephalopods kind of had it there, the kind of way to travel. Now they've improved on it a little bit, they've iterated it in much the way that you're talking about, but I think there are big advancements. Like they hadn't sought out other life, even though they had the head start in the spiders.
And I think to add to what you both said, in human history, I think the greatest technological advances were during wartime, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think to your point about the infighting being the cause of any improvements, I think, yeah, that makes sense. There is continued improvement too now, I suppose. But yeah, the most I suppose experimental innovation happened during wartime.
Survival, right? I mean, it's what drives us to survival, whether it's the hunter-gatherers and living in caves, to we need to eat and survive, and to now it's we don't have to work. I mean, you don't have to go out and find food. You can go down the street and buy it. So you take your motivations and your desires to somewhere else, which is now profit. And it's so yeah, I mean, I do think Tchaikovsky is trying to make a statement too about evolution and survival and kind of the like an ideal of peace, maybe. I do think the like I think Chris, you mentioned the build up for the parasite was very dark, like in the middle, which is the part that, of course, we talked a lot about. But the build up for that, and then the end result was a little bit like disappointing because it was setting up something very climactic, and it ended up being kind of okay. Like, and maybe it's because we read The Expanse not too long ago, so I think maybe that idea of the parasite and
That's true.
maybe that's kind of what we had in our mind. Like I know I did. I kind of compared the two and thought of it kind of in that way. But yeah, I just think it was kind of a letdown of
Yeah.
conclusion.
Yeah,
But
it's a bit like watching the Alien movies, right? And the alien's on board the damn ship, and he's hunting and murdering everybody. And at the end, he runs into Ripley, and Ripley says, "Do you know you're killing people and you don't have to?" And the alien goes, "Shit, you're right." And so pops in the front cockpit seat with Ripley, and they just go back the rest of the way together. You know, it's kind of you set up this really like it was really dark. It was horror. It was a lot. You know, you really felt there was a threat here. In a classic gonna lose. You're gonna be who you are, but not know who you are. You're not gonna be in control of your own body, which is one of those frightening things that I think we can do. And then to just kind of say, "Oh, look, if you don't do this, we're gonna kill you." And then it goes, "All right then."
yeah, it's like those teeth hurt. You shouldn't do that. Oh, okay. I didn't realize I was hurting people. Sorry about that. Yeah, yeah. So I just think it's almost like counter to evolution that we know of, right? Because even insects fight for territory, and they fight to the death for resources and territory, and so I guess it's like another level. And I think he is making a statement about the spiders being evolved and finding new ways to survive and to thrive with other species and creatures and beings. And I do think if you jumped into the second book, not reading the first, and you read about spiders that have names, and I think you'd be a little confused.
Yeah.
Like what?
But I think they could have, like, for me, my perfect book, like this book, my version of this book, which what I would have liked was like cut the spiders, make everything just humans coming from Earth, cut the
Mhm.
cephalopods. We don't need that part, and just make the movie about the book about the parasites, and then like AI on the ship and stuff like that. You can do it without needing like I don't need Kern, I don't need those things. I just wanted more. Those things like distracted me, sort of like I don't need these things. And I think I would have liked a lot more because all those parts, like the AI part, the parasite part, like I enjoyed them a lot. It just felt there was too much of other things that I didn't like in between.
What I was hoping for is like these different seeds that they sent out for humanity to see different planets,
Yeah.
and a whole nother set of characters, and a whole nother without the spiders, and just kind of,
Mhm.
and then maybe in the end bring them all together. But I was hoping for another ship that was seeding a planet, and a whole like, and you could have just kind of started over again with a whole new set of characters. And I think tying in the spiders and everything, I kind of, and again, I'm cynical, so I kind of wonder if the publisher's like, look, people love the spiders, so don't get rid of the spiders. Bringing the spiders back in. We need another book. People love the spiders.
Yeah.
Don't get rid of them. You know, kind of they want more spiders. But
The spiders were cool because before it was like, oh, they're supposed to be horrific and they're supposed to the humans don't know them and stuff like that. But now that they're like just like, I don't know, cuddly spiders and like, I don't know, pets, or not pets, but you know what I mean? Mascots or whatever. They don't have the same feeling as the first book, I feel.
don't want to rap on it too much because I did enjoy it. By the end, I didn't love it like I did the first book. Like, there's some really interesting stuff. When they were talking about when they looked at the city that was built by Lanty's sort of older version, that she'd built a structure into it. I thought a lot of that stuff was really fascinating.
Yeah.
Like, there's little gems of ideas there where you kind of go, shit, that's a really interesting prospect that they did. And in that way, you can see that there is an intelligence and a sentience there that you don't see at the horror section over the Parasite, where it actually is thinking. It is sort of taking on the persona of that individual and not realizing that it is totally, it thinks it is Lanty, but Lanty is gone, in a lot of ways. But again, those bits for me were a bit too short, and the other stuff was kind of a bit longer, that kind of philosophical. We get an awful lot of discussion about how the octopi communicate with the colours, and I don't think that worked as satisfactory as some of the other communication methods. Like, even the old Republic Sea, all that kind of language from the first book was done much better than the colours, I felt like, for me. And the fact that Portia had an understanding of it and Helena didn't, and then flip-flop and stuff. I ended up sort of skimming over a lot of that kind of stuff because it was like, unless this results in something, I can't really see what's going to happen. And it didn't really result in anything, for me anyway. So there were some really fascinating kind of ideas in there about consciousness and kind of or motivations and all that kind of stuff. So, it definitely had talking points and interesting points in it. So,
yeah. So I wanted to go back to something Steve said earlier. So, no, I just want to discuss the insects also fight for survival bit. Like, yes, but in my opinion, the higher or like we consider ourselves a higher form of consciousness, I think, like humanity does. So is it maybe that Tchaikovsky is saying that we need better solutions than just like the default fight for survival thing? And I feel like he's sort of really drilling down and doubling down on that with the two books. I think a little bit not a little bit, Guns of the Dawn, which is the only other book by Tchaikovsky I've read, also was a commentary on the nature of war and what it does to people. So I think I like the focus on trying to find other solutions that aren't the brute force, let's fight it out solution. Like, I think that's kind of what I like about it. And yeah, I guess that it would be more realistic if we had wars, perhaps, but then I think a lot of literature and art also helps people move forward and do better, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is maybe Tchaikovsky telling us, here are some ways we can do better.
I think that I don't have a problem with ending as like what you said. Like, that part, I'm perfectly fine. I just feel like it feels like it's not earned. It feels like it's a bit too easy. Like, I would have liked if, you put a bit more, they need to put more effort. There's a lot more conflict at the beginning. Like the part with the spiders in the previous book, like it was not that easy to get like the males to be equal to the females, and they're still not. Like, it's a lot of work. Like, that felt earned to me. Well, the humans and the spider getting together and like the parasite thing, it didn't feel like the same thing. That was my main issue. Not that how it actually resolved. I'm fine with that. I just want more effort.
That makes sense. I think in the first book we did sort of set up for the ending that we got with how the spiders resolved their conflict with the ants, right? So with this Parasite, we never saw anything like that. So yeah, I can see that. I can see why that would feel unearned. Sorry, Jarrod, were you going to say something?
Well, I like the in the first book you also saw when you were seeing the evolution of the spiders, you were seeing all the historical context of what the spiders had to go through to get where they got to. and there were obvious parallels to humanity's own evolution in historical context, and I really loved how he did that with the spiders in the first book, and I don't think I wanted to see that with the octopus race in this book, but the octopi did not have that same like going through the trial by fire in history that the spiders did, and so their impact on the story later on wasn't as impactful as we wanted it to be, and that's where I think the resonance, the empathic attachment you needed in order to have the a good catharsis at the end, I guess, aesthetic reaction, So that's where I think I would really wanted to see that, and I didn't quite get that like we did in the first one.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I think the octopuses, they didn't really, if I'm remembering correctly, they didn't really play too much of a role in the final resolution. They just mostly got rescued by the humans and spiders, right? The thing that they did do set us up for the next book, I think, with the wormhole. But yeah, I guess this was sort of maybe even a contrast to the Spider Society, because they had to fight all kinds of predators, but these guys had no predators, and they got a lot of technology handed to them. So they grew and the population got quite big, and then they had problems from that.
Yeah.
And then they got attacked by the parasite, and yeah, I don't know what the implication of that was for the origin, but yeah, it is different. But I see your point about maybe not getting too attached to the cephalopods. Is it cephalopods or cephalopods? The audiobook narrator called them cephalopods. Cephalopods? Okay. Yeah, that's what I was calling them until the audiobook narrator said cephalopods. Have I been saying it wrong?
Celtics, Celtics.
We're going on an adventure.
Oh, and that she did that bit brilliantly too. Like, it gave me chills when she said, "We are going on an adventure."
Yeah, she was pretty good. I listened to most of it in audio too.
Nice. What did you think of the narrator?
I liked her. I think she was. I don't think I listened to audio in the first one, but I listened to most of the second book on audio, and I thought she did a great job.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the third one in audio when we get around to it. I liked her enough to do that.
By the way, I have to leave now.
Okay.
It's 5
Thanks, Dan.
exactly. I have to leave. Thanks for the discussion, and yeah, let's talk about red shirts next week. Bye, guys.
Yes, see you then.
Thanks, Dan.
See you then.
Bye. So
now we can say awful things about him when he's not here.
Yes, next 10 minutes, and then I'll send him a link to that part of the video so to make sure he listens.
What was he thinking?
I think it's short.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think it goes a long way to resolving some of its issues, but it probably needed another 100 pages, or taking the resolution that he does in the last 100 pages and moving it further forward in the book. So you get a longer run into it, for me anyway, because I can see what he was trying to do, and he gets really close to it for me, because there is some exploration into why the change so quickly, but as others have said, it just happens quickly for me, especially I think it's fair to say, like, one of the reasons that people go for military kind of intervention all the time is because it's actually the quickest and the thing that you can get quickest results for. Kind of resolution like that takes more time in general, but I do agree that it is really nice to see somebody showing that actually taking the time to get to know somebody's problems and understanding what their motivations are, etc., can lead to a more universally accepted outcome, which is definitely an idea that we should be embracing more as a species, I would say.
Yeah.
No, I'm definitely glad I read it. So
yeah,
I thought it was still fun, even if it didn't live up to the promise of the first book. It was good.
Keen to read on, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough act to follow. I think when you have a book like Children of Time. It's tough to follow it
Yeah.
up. So
And I guess you need that balance of keeping enough similarity that it feels familiar, but not enough that it feels like the same book. And I think different people might be impacted differently by how much of what is in there. So yeah, I totally get that. And I think this maybe wasn't a good set of books to read back to back. Maybe a break would have helped. But yeah, I found out in a Goodreads review or something, or maybe it was someone who commented on one of our podcast episodes. But apparently there's a series called Uplift, which is about uplifted consciousness. Like you can't creatures can't gain sentience until they've been uplifted by some group of people who run the galaxy for whatever. That's the gist I got. But humans are special because they got to sentience by themselves or something. That's the premise of the series. And I think Tchaikovsky is building on that in some way. I believe the series has been influenced by that. And he also did explicitly use the word uplift in this book somewhere. So that may be an interesting book to read for the podcast to understand the influences. But I thought that was interesting that this story is based on or building on something that was done previously. The
Well,
nanovirus is sort of the uplift.
Yeah. It seems all our sci-fi we're reading these days is building on something that's come before.
Yeah. It certainly does. Were there any other talking points about this book before we move on to the short story?
The only other thing I
Not
want
so
to say
short
is
story.
yeah, not so short. Don't be calling it a short story. Was the idea that it wasn't meant to be written as a trilogy, which was kind of was it Salty Horse? I think had commented on the thing. I think that actually helped give it some freedom for me, because it doesn't feel like we've all said like it was planned that way, and in some ways, and it definitely feels like this was the result of having a real hit. And trying, writing for a lot of years and kind of hitting something and going, right, well, I've got to do something with this. And it's not that it's terrible. Like, it's definitely not. It's just, it's not as interconnected or as planned as I think as a lot of his other stuff seems to be that I've read, which is good. But it was great to have that kind of perspective.
Yep. And what was I going to say? I'd like to read the other sci-fi trilogy of his that came out recently. I think that one's a proper trilogy, right? Not a bunch of standalones in the same universe. So that might be interesting to read. But later, maybe next year. Cool. So do you guys want to move on to the short story then?
Let's move on to James Blish.
James Blish. And Jarrod's handle today is, what is it, Jarrod?
Protozoan Professor.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I think this story is actually quite apropos for what we're talking about.
Right? Yeah.
The seeds of men scattered across the galaxy, right? That's basically the premise here. And I love, first of all, I love one of the lines in the beginning here where it says, it takes a lot of arrogance to think that you can scatter men, or at least things very much like men, all over the face of the galaxy. And I thought that was a great line that is directly relatable to a lot of sci-fi.
Yeah.
Not just this story, but a whole bunch of sci-fi. And I just thought that was just quite fitting for what we were just talking about with Children of Ruin and what this story is about as well. And that was really cool. And on top of that, man, did I like this Blish stuff way better than Cities in Flight. Wow, what a difference.
Nice. Did you think there were a lot of similarities? Like, there were a lot of themes, yes, but actual plot or story similarities in the two books that we just read. There's the water world, of course. That's the aspect of repeating names across generations of the people, and I guess a bit of the microscopic intelligence also. Although I think Tchaikovsky did that way better.
Yeah. This story definitely has a jargon language problem. I think there are some things that are named too similarly. There is, especially I'd say the first 3 or 4 pages, there are a lot of scientific terms thrown there that you just kind of have to go like, okay.
Yeah.
I got
Yeah.
you here, but I like Jarrod in the setup. I love the idea when they misspelled hubris and stuff, and this idea, like a lot of science fiction, where it's really important that humanity and men survive for the good of the future of space, you know. Whereas in actual fact, what they created was nothing like men. You know, it was it was again. I it sort of felt like a bit of satire in that way, insofar as, you know, we're making humanity live, but not really. As it turned out, they were giving them crumbs of knowledge, and this idea that giving people knowledge without context or without growth, again, linking to these stories with the cephalopods, etc., I think is that the exploration of that was, I think, very, very good. By the end of the story, for sure.
Yeah. I like that, and it made me think of all the things we don't know about our universe. So you know how they think that there are other worlds, and I think they even say other universes at some point, and they have this plate left to them. So I guess maybe this is a story idea, but what if, like, you know, all the what wave particle duality is a message for us that there are other universes. And I mean, I'm not saying that's true, but like, it's a cool way to expand our notion of the world and how little we are compared to how much we don't know.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I liked that aspect of it, and I liked the premise and the setup. Did not enjoy the tons of action scenes in between. Did not like the, in my opinion, far too much unnecessary science exposition. I feel like Blish did this a lot in Cities in Flight too. Like Steve's surprised that I don't like science exposition for once. So here's the thing.
What?
So I feel like look, when it's important and relevant to the story, it makes sense. Like sometimes I feel like the author's just dumping their research. They did some research and they want us to know that they did it, and that's why it's there. And this felt a lot like that. Like Cities in Flight had a bunch of equations, Steve, that did not make sense. Absolutely did not make sense. But they were there. Anyway, what do you think, Steve?
I liked it. I think it was a little long, but by the end, reflecting on the story, and Chris, to your point, I think humanity likes the idea of leaving a mark somewhere that will live on, that will continue, even if it's not them, or just they want to leave a mark somewhere. Like they want to be remembered. They want to be, they want to be important. So they want to leave something behind. And I think that's kind of everyone, right? I think we all want to leave something behind or be remembered for something, when, you know, the truth is probably the opposite. But by the end, I thought it was interesting. The Varsha you mentioned about just kind of like where we are, and it kind of gives you a different perspective on, you know, us and our universe and what it really is. What's a drop of water? I mean, what if we're just,
you know, they're going to other islands at most, and I think they're going to other worlds. Which, and it feels a bit like Nightfall too, right? Although these guys do not have an existential crisis over their smallness at all, which I think is interesting in the context of the other books that we've read by Blish, because Cities in Flight, he sort of shrunk the universe to human size, if that makes sense. And like there was no quantum, like they just conquered, not the, did they just do the galaxy or the entire universe? I think they did.
Yeah, no, it was the whole universe and time itself.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Ended. it was like in 6,000 years, and that's all it took. And but no, that's a good point. This was definitely like expanded to make the universe so big compared to, you know, these little bacterial characters. And I just love it. How I love the description of the one guy, I forget his name, but Levon, breaking through the surface of the water and what
Yeah.
happens to him and his struggle to get back in. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I love that description. And it just reminded me of I was laughing because it reminded me of some of those SpongeBob episodes where they come out on land and they're this little tiny sponge and stuff like that, and they just get kicked around and picked up by humans or whatever. It just reminded me of that for some reason, and I was just laughing the whole time. But his description of that happening, I thought was just brilliant, because he made it so alien to Levon.
Yes.
Even though we knew what it was so alien to him, and the description of it, what happened to him, was so alien, and how he had to recover from it. And I thought it was that made my day when I read that. I was just like, that's great.
And the misusing of terms, like what he was calling the sky, or not knowing what stars were, and all of that kind of stuff. Again, really, it was thought-provoking as well as being sort of humorous and satirical in some way as well, because it did make me think, much like you said, Varsha, about all the stuff that we don't know, the stuff that we have such pigeon understanding of about the universe, and how, somebody might leave us some breadcrumbs, but without that evolutionary step yourself and having made your way up to it, it's sort of no good to you. That knowledge, somebody giving it to you now, is very difficult. And again, it's an old conversation for the book we're going to discuss tomorrow. I mean, it's a lot of these same themes are right. They're all these books are the same in terms of thematics, and the approach, and it's so different. I just think it's so interesting about how science fiction stories have evolved and changed, but are stayed sort of the same.
Yes. And I think I keep coming back to this in Rejoice, Stephen Erickson's book, Rejoice, A Knife to the Heart. During First Contact, I think there are a few world leaders, or maybe just one, who makes the intelligent decision to involve science fiction authors in figuring out how to communicate with the aliens, because they are the ones who've had imagination and have spent like years thinking about scenarios like this. So, and at the time I read that book, I hadn't read enough sci-fi to figure out exactly why this makes so much sense. I think now, across all the short stories that we've been reading, and it's still not much. I've read like 25 or 30 books since then, sci-fi, but it still feels like enough of a foundation to see exactly why that makes sense. But
I think it was the Canadian Prime Minister.
Yeah, the Canadian, of course.
Of course.
Of course, because the author is Canadian, not because I think the Canadian Prime Minister is automatically the most brilliant. But
that's exactly it. Yeah.
Oh boy.
There was something else I wanted to say though about the story. I forgot.
A bit like you, Varsha, I have to say, I spent the first 15 pages going, I'm not finishing it. I had such low expectations going into it, that especially those first 4 pages when it was just jargon, I was like,
yeah,
I wonder, could I just read a synopsis of this and pretend to everybody that I've read it, because this isn't fun. But I am glad I persevered with it, and it does mean, if I hadn't have finished it, and we've got like The Demolished Man coming up in a while for our reading thing, I will attack that with kind of renewed vigor, because I was able to get through this and enjoy it, and got a lot out of it,
Nice. Yeah, I like that. There is so the first 4. Yeah, he started with a battle, right? Like the first scene was interesting, where they figured out what to do and how to proceed now that the world wasn't quite what they thought, or they ran into technical issues. But immediately after they wake up, they're in a war with the creatures surrounding them. That went on for a long time. Like I think I've talked about this enough in my second apocalypse discussions, that I do not like action scenes, and this just went on and on with the action scenes. But then when that stopped, I got interested again. Yeah, so back and forth between action scenes. And so I think back to my point earlier about not liking the unnecessary science exposition. I did enjoy the first section again, which talked about the biology and how they'll make the changes. I believe Blish was a biologist, or he had a degree in biology, according to the introduction in this book, which sort of tracks, I think, because I enjoyed the biology sections in this and the first book of Cities in Flight. I forget what it's called, but that one was about how they did pharmaceutical research to find a drug to help humans live forever. And those sections I thought didn't feel labor to me like the physics and mechanics sections did. So yeah, anyway, that was that. So overall, I enjoyed the story. I could have done without the action scenes, but in the one section that I felt like I'd like to remove this.
Pretty cool though. You had the even during the beginning with the big fight with the eaters, I think they were called. There was still like the discussion from the like the intellectual human, whoever his name was. He's like trying to talk about the plates, and the General Levon is just like, no, not now, you know. And I thought that was funny. And then of course once they lost one of the plates, that was a big tragedy. And we'll just go on without it. And then they were pining for it again and stuff like that. So it was interesting how that that relic from humanity of another time was bandied about as something to be a savior, but it was like a false hope almost, because they couldn't once they lost one of them, they couldn't completely translate it, and they had to rely on their own ingenuity in order to even complete the minor task of making this little spaceship, in quotes. It wasn't a spaceship, but it was I liked how he played with all that. I liked how he played with all that that back and forth between relying on previous technology and being ingenious enough to make your own from scratch with what you have.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. And the plate, everything to do with the plate, I think, was the thread I tracked most closely and enjoyed the most. But that said, that reminded me of a couple of things that I felt were a bit sore spots for me in the story. One was the acceptance of the Protos. Protos, is that the creature that they collaborated with? Naturally accepting the humans as the superior species, or like, we'll just follow you. Yeah, I know you're great. Which and like fine, but that didn't feel earned to me. But okay. Did you have anything to talk about that bit? What did you guys think? I wanted to gather some opinions, and then I wanted to also talk about the ending, what everybody thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I didn't love that bit where it was like humanity and men are great, even though it wasn't really men. It was just this kind of, the biggest things, the most powerful things will be thing. Intelligence doesn't really come into anything until it gets to a certain point. You don't reason with base life forms. You just kind of survive. And do that stage. Didn't love that bit, but I sort of glossed over it at that stage. Yeah, that was my.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think what the reason, maybe I can explain myself a little better. The reason I thought it was unearned was because it felt like the species that they collaborated with was too happy to just follow humans. Like, they never had a thought about, maybe we can take what they know and improve ourselves. It was, we will just, like, you are our savior, we will just tag along with you. And we got to know nothing else about these species to tell us why they would do that. Maybe that they've been fighting the other creatures who they've been battling with.
they did have one part where they refused to give the plate back, and so there was a little bit of rebellious, nature to that for a little bit, and then once they actually succeeded at their scientific expedition, they were like, "Oh, here you go. There's the plates. I'll never keep anything from you ever again." And
but it did feel very much like it was humans that had the ideas, but the prosos were the doers. You know, they were the people that enacted the ideas. The humans were incapable of doing anything themselves other than being right. As Levon kind of breaking the surface tension or whatever, nearly killed himself.
Yeah. That's a strange. It's a strange situation because they're not like cattle or dogs, you know, or they're like dogs who can talk, I guess, you know. But it's but he's kind of intimating that they don't have the cognition for imagination, and whether that's an evolutionary trait on the proto's part or just you know, the old, like some other typical old science fiction, just humans are great and they're the best and that's it, you know. But yeah. Old sci-fi.
Yeah, I suppose I overlooked the fact that, you know, this is humans who are evolved enough to go traveling across space, come here. So, and these guys are probably less evolved or whatever. And yeah, I still don't like the worshipful nature of these creatures, but fine, I can live with that. There is an explanation. So the ending, what did you guys think? There were two parts to it, right? The here, let's all, yeah, I think this was in a little bit of a let's all be friends and work together ending too, just like Children of Ruin. And then the last sentence about how he saw the woman and then he didn't care anymore about the plates. Like, what is that really the note you want to leave the story on after everything you've done?
He wasn't thinking with his head anymore. Yeah, no, the intelligence didn't come into it.
Nope.
That was like, yeah, that was a problem I had with the story. I was like, what? Okay, that's the end. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, if we had ended on the note about you should all work together and you should all be friends and work together against the other things, that would have been fine. But then the protos are like, we'll give you the plates back. You can do whatever you want with it. And he's like, nope, I don't care about that anymore. I found a girl.
They've evolved to get horny. That was it.
Very of the time.
I did like the bit where they kind of went to the other world, the other puddle, and they were like, these guys, they're eaters. Oh shit, those guys. It was like the whole new ecosystem that they had to go and conquer again, and learn those skills again. I did like that aspect of it where they were like, oh right, okay, this is the same but different. This world,
Yeah. And what did you guys make of the scale of the ship that they built? I felt like they are microscopic creatures, but they talked about wood. Is that their version of wood? Yeah. Or that bit was a bit confusing to me. Did they build macroscopic proportioned ships, but they were microscopic organisms? Anyway, but
yeah,
good story overall.
Yeah.
Took too long to finish.
Cool.
Good story
I like the one line where he said, cease firing until you see their eye spots. It reminded me of that famous line from the Revolutionary War. Until you see the whites of their eyes. But I was like, oh, that's funny.
Interesting.
So it was published in 1952. So I kind of think that the Go Humanity thing was probably a result of World War II propaganda and the war effort. So I think it's interesting to kind of frame it in the time frame all these stories are written.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I kind of attributed to that too. Is Yeah,
the height of the military-industrial complex, revving up, and a lot of rah propaganda during those times.
Makes sense.
Oh, sure.
Cool. So are we ready to wrap up in that case?
Yeah.
Any other points? Okay, then we'll see everybody in a week for the first 9 chapters of Red Shirts and the short story by Philip K. Dick with the funny name. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but that's what we'll do next week. Thank you. Chris has the name. So
Beyond lies the wub.
Beyond lies the wub. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you in a week. Bye.